Thank you, Amélia and Rodrigo, for the invite. Actually, I also actually attended the first year Porto Academy in Porto in 2013. Quite interesting feedback. And I'm going to be speaking on behalf of my partner today as well. We will probably be short, but I think just to put you in a bit of give you some context of where we're coming from. Papa is Japanese, I'm Thai. I was in Japan for quite a while. We met there. We moved back to Bangkok just because there's more things happening. In Southeast Asia, we're still building. We need more buildings that are better quality, that have more possibility. And we're in this stage of this hybrid environment of moving in different directions, of different things coming together. So it's very different from here. But I think today, instead of focusing on our differences, perhaps I think I want to talk about our similarities, because I was just talking to many of the architects the other day that we are coming from so many different places, but share so many of the same values. So I think that's a very precious kind of a moment that we have here, and I kind of want to talk more about that. We were established in 2017. It's, I think, our eighth year of practice now. We are a team of 5 plus 1 or 2 interns, and we are mainly designing this small to medium scale residential buildings, newly built, of 20% of the newly built, 20% perhaps renovations. We also have some small commercial projects and lots of pavilions, as you will see later. Again, today we want to, rather than highlight our differences, we want to talk about our similarities. Throughout our practice, we've discovered that we want to introduce an equitable and public nature to all of our projects, even if the smallest one, the housing projects, we feel that there is a publicness or public sense, even the most private spaces. So we want to make spaces where various contradictions and opposing elements are happening at the same time, like all the new, local, and international are present, allowing the architecture to be more open and to be more interpreted in different ways and becoming more accessible. We don't like exclusivity. So architecture for us is always a medium for creating different conditions of openness. So in our words, trying to free it from this singularity or developing a form or in a way that it's very close or very specific, but rather free it from that. So regarding context, instead of highlighting what we have only in our context, we want to communicate through our projects what is readily available or easy to find or accessible by everyone within the context. At the beginning of our practice in 2017, we left our jobs in Tokyo, working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we decided, okay, we have to stop, we have to go and start our own thing, and we're going to move to Thailand to do it. Before that, we took a break and took a hike in Nepal. So we took a 1-week trekking, hiking up the mountains in Nepal just to sort of reset and think about and talk amongst ourselves what we wanted to do. We found this tea house during our hike that we believe to be perhaps the most beautiful piece of architecture we had seen in a while. So this tea house was built, of course, by the locals, not by an architect, because it wouldn't have been so beautiful if it was, maybe. It was right after the earthquake. So locals were building their houses on these big boulders to protect falling debris from the mountains. And then inside, once you enter, you have these little shelves and kitchens, which are all kind of anchored against the stone wall. So the rock created this space around it where the house was built. In front of this hut emerged a little plaza where people sort of gathered and talked, had tea, and connected. So we were sort of deeply impressed by how effortless this boulder created such a beautiful place. And we were thinking to ourselves, maybe our architecture can be something similar. Instead of trying to create everything, we try to start something and create this boulder-like thing that engages or allows people to interpret or adapt or adopt or generate things from what we make. We travel a lot. We've been traveling a lot since we were students. We still do. We enjoy traveling and taking photos and seeing buildings. And sometimes we take too many photos and we never look at them. And recently, after we start to begin to lecture to many different people, we go through our photo albums and we start to somehow group our photos sort of subjectively. So we begin to classify them, again, very subjectively, into comparison chart by using the topics we are most interested in, which is on the vertical side, the resources that the architecture or the object uses. And on the horizontal side, the degree of openness and hackability or editability that something has. So on the far right, you have very high text, closed, exclusive, you don't know what's inside, you don't know how it's made. On the very left side, very low tech, very open, everything is seen and very editable, anybody can join in. On the very bottom, you would have very unprocessed native materials, like you taking a boulder from somewhere and just using it as a part of the architecture, very contextual, site-specific. On the very top is the industrial materials that you find all around the world, in Thailand, in Switzerland, in Spain, aluminum window frames, and so forth. So we find ourselves like trying to place ourselves like what we actually want to do and where lies our interest the most. So we find that our interest is somewhere within this realm. Although we are in love with vernacularity, vernacular architecture, we can never make that. It's too late for that, you know, sadly. And but we want to move away from the high tech and exclusive and be somewhere in between, and something that is perhaps not fully low tech or editable, but something that is allowing for these different spectrums to come together in this area of objects and making. So we come up with perhaps kind of guidelines or things we tell ourselves when we design, just so that we don't forget what we're trying to do. We can get lost sometimes in the many projects, commercial, little houses, pavilions, interiors, and we forget why we do what we do. So some of the perhaps guidelines that we give ourselves are these 5, I would say, guidelines. I wouldn't say principles because it's too strong, but guidelines. So the first one, which is the familiarity of materials and systems. We want to give value to ordinary materials and systems that are part of the surrounding culture or environment. For us, this approach is about finding beauty or joy in what is already available or around us. It's about making architecture that reflects the realities of everyday surroundings and not romanticizing or perhaps making too ideal or amazing images, but something that is beautiful and ordinary at the same time. Open-ended structures, meaning that we want to create very flexible and versatile structures that allows for diverse interpretation. So this means the structure is not just holding up the building, but it's more of an enabler of space, which forms the boundaries of function and form that are very fluid. So structures, again, should be open to new interpretations, for renovations, for different usages, and it's not strictly limited or defined to a certain function or client. It is a form or system that should adapt and evolve over time. Durability and transience. Because, again, I'll go over this, we're building in Thailand, which means reinforced concrete is the cheapest way to build. We want to counterbalance and understand the durability of things, and at the same time, sort of the temporariness of other things. Right? So we try to counterbalance permanence with lightness in a lasting system, which would allow for changing of its components inside. So this may be about balancing durable structures like concrete, designed for longevity, with softer structures that are perhaps regenerated or needs to be replaced in a couple of years and adaptable or maybe brought from somewhere else. We truly believe in incorporating different timelines and lifespans of materials and components in what we are doing. Of course, exposed assembly, which talks about not hiding or not making details our own secret, but showing how things are actually done. So ordinary people can see how our architecture is. exposing the true construction methods rather than hiding them. And by exposing how things are put together, we feel like we are freeing knowledge from us experts to ordinary people who may or may not appreciate or understand architecture from the beginning. And finally, essentializing elements. We create space using very, very simple fundamental terminologies and elements, emphasizing only the simple and essential things that are needed to create that space or that architecture, and allowing freedom for other people to do what they like. And before I go into the projects, I mean, we were just talking about earlier about control, and we come from a context which is very difficult to control. And if we were to control everything, I think it would lose our minds, in the first year of practice. So it's about, I think, the same. So we are trying to balance control and freedom. And you will see that in Asia or in where we practice, there is a culture of fluidity everywhere. You cannot control it. And then if you control it, you're somehow, I feel, going against nature a little bit. So you will see how we kind of incorporate all the 5 perhaps guidelines into our projects. This first project is House K. It's located in an old residential area in Bangkok, characterized by 2-story buildings, which is a bit set back from the street. Over time, the neighborhood has developed. Its different houses has been extended, attached, renovated, painted in different colors. The client came to us with the old house, which was in very poor condition. And again, in Thailand, it's not always possible to renovate because the houses in the past were so poorly constructed. You have one flood coming in and everything is falling down, right? So we had no choice to rebuild. However, we wanted to rebuild a house which looked like it could continue to renovate. So this house takes on a form which seemingly almost emerges organically from its surroundings, blurring perhaps the distinction between its origin when it started and its end or when it will finish. The neighbors still call it the unfinished house, and I think they still think it's the contractor maybe ran away or left or something like that. And yes. So during the design process, not only we think of the house or the buildings as something that's continuous, we also do a lot of model making. And I think in context where you're working with different types of workers, a lot of the construction workers in Thailand are immigrants. They don't read drawings or write Thai sometimes. It's very useful to make these models. But sometimes we do 1-to-1 and drawings of 1-to-1 and models. This model is actually a working model where in 1-to-20, where we can take out different floors and we were adjusting furniture with the client. And we keep on updating the model as changes were made on site. Changes on site are very common. It's something that's very acceptable there still. And we even sort of took photos of the bricks and put it on the model. So it's kind of like real-time updating the model and the site together. So the house is set back from all sides of the side boundary, each floor having this one distinct function, no hierarchy and very open and free-flowing. The first floor is for the mother, and it connects to a garden surrounding. The second floor is a shared kitchen, living space with the balconies around. And the third floor is the son's private space with his own rooftop balcony. So the disconnection of each floor means eventually they could sort of occupy or rent out some spaces or perhaps be accessed separately from one another. The construction method you will see in this house, which is RC post-in beam structure, is the most common and cheapest structure we have to build in Thailand at the moment. It's even used to construct high-rise buildings of 50 stories, which is, to you might be very surprising. However, people try to hide it behind facades and cladding, decorate them so that they don't look like this kind of RC grid. So the structure is built, and then we sort of had this core concrete structure erected up, and then we cantilever the beams from each side. After the structure is built, then these bricks, which are the cheapest, most typical ones we have, are kind of stacked in between space. Once the house is finished, we don't have kind of distinguishing materials between indoor and outdoor. It's pretty much very fluid. And the white core in the middle serves functions for the open spaces, and everything you see here, such as lighting fixtures, the the steel, everything is actually something that you can actually buy easily from any home center or anywhere in Thailand. The first floor for the mother is defined by a surrounding corridor, which is connected to a garden. And on the east balcony, we kind of wanted to experiment with something soft and flexible. So we installed this curtains, which is actually made of just car covers that we stitched into a big pattern, like a skirt. And we worked with an intern who wanted to be a fashion designer, but is in architecture for some reason. And she was also confused. So we were like, okay, you can do curtain for us. And she was our curtain designer during her internship. And so it's actually, she got an inspiration from her skirt. So it's actually flaring at the bottom and more narrow to the top. When it's moving very dramatically in contrast to the very rigid and sturdy structure that we've built. Projecting beams allow for natural light to come in to the interior spaces, and becoming shared spaces like walkways and corridors, and then provide connectivity and offer potential for future expansions within as well. And the third floor is this kind of core bedroom, bathroom hybrid space, and it has its own access to the rooftops. And as you see, if you look carefully, the house has a very clear order. We are very interested, or perhaps focused on the building order, and we like to show the composition very clearly. For example, the bricks are piled onto the concrete frame, slightly shifted off. The sashes or the windows, of course, we designed those custom made and installed on the outside of the walls. So somehow the house can be returned to its default state of structure only, because you see different elements and where they come from and which one is more important, which one is less. In this image, maybe it's most evident that you see that all of the windows are encased on the outside, and you can see very clearly sort of how the house is made and how it can perhaps be edited. An occupation of the house reveals the ways in which the client sort of appropriate the space. The second floor has become a kitchen, living room, bicycle parking, and the mix of interior and exterior functions. And then the mother's room, which has now become kind of a collection of her personal memories and objects that she uses in her travels. The second project, Following the Forest, is located in Chiang Mai, a very large province in northern Thailand. And just to give you context, it's pretty much warm all year round. This is the weather we have 90% of the time in Thailand, right? We have 30 degrees Celsius, but also a lot of rain. So the only concern we have when we're building is the moisture and sometimes a ventilation and allowing heat to transfer through it. In this project, the client had an empty plot of land that wouldn't sell. Like, I have this land, I want to sell it, nobody wants to buy it. Let's do something sort of temporary and sort of give activation to the land while it's waiting for somebody to buy it, right? So this semi-outdoor structure is a place now, like a market for locals to relax and gather. It consists of an inclined roof made of layered leaves, teak, which are kind of specifically from that area, but not at all expensive, very cheap. The structure is a composition of steel pipe grid frames with elevated platforms. So this is not at all our invention. It's nothing new. The leaves have been used for centuries in some parts of Cambodia, northern parts of Burma, and northern parts of Thailand. So we have mountains in the north, and every dry season, these leaves fall, a lot of them fall, and we have forest fires. So locals gather them and sell them and use them to thatch their houses to reduce the risk of forest fires, but also to take advantage of the texture and of the quality of the leaves. So they're really big, they kind of come this big, and one side is very waxy, so they're kind of having a slightly waterproof kind of quality. The plan, again, with all our plans, they're very, very simple. It's uncomplicated, geometrically shaped roof on a 2x2 brick clusters of platforms. So it means there is no clear entry or exit from any side. People are free to use it as they wish. The structure, once built, it stands almost invisible from in the forest. Its surroundings, very slim steel pipes protecting the environment. We deliberately cut all the steel members to no more than 3 meters length, which means the entire building can be assembled by hand. 2 to 3 workers. You don't have to be skilled. So any guy can just sort of come, handyman can come and, assemble this structure. And the joints are kind of using nuts and bolts, which means they're ready to be reassembled and put somewhere else. And if the site sells, you put it down and you put it somewhere. So it's kind of ready to go away or be moved away. Everything in this structure is constructed entirely by the repetition of common materials and assembled by hand. You'll see in a bit that each leaf is actually individually folded and strung onto pieces of bamboo before being layered again by hand on a hand-tied steel mesh. The entire structure somehow to us can be regenerated by replacing different parts. So if you break one part spring, you can just fix that part and you can just use the other part. So it can somehow at the same time be fixed in certain parts while other parts are being used. Inside, people are free to circulate again through these pathways that are created by the elevated platforms. And the leaves themselves must be replaced every 2 to 3 years since they decompose very quickly with the moisture, and which can be done again by anyone with no particular skills. After we put on the leaves, they started to kind of flutter, so people got concerned. So we decided to place rocks on top of them from the surrounding sides to weigh them down. So once finished, the roof becomes like a second ground. It's a gathering place for living and decomposing things. Somehow to us, this architecture reminds us of the human body, where you have dead skin cells at the same time, new cells being born at the same time in the same body, coexisting. At the lowest point, the roof comes down to 1.5 meters. This means that an element of architecture that people usually cannot touch now can be touched and can be seen and can be understood. Every weekend, this is what becomes of the space. So local vendors come to sell vegetables and handicrafts, and these platforms, which are designed kind of in the same level, but because the roof is inclining, there's people kind of adopt the space, sometimes sitting on the ground, sitting on chairs. And the roof height, which comes really low, makes people feel closer to the ground. And then finally, after 2 years, it was time to retouch the roof. So this is what happens after 2 years of decay. Let me show you a quick video. So this was like 1 week before we decided we had to remove everything down, but it's become this ecosystem of new trees and squirrels, insects, who started to burrow into the roof, making the roof leak and all that, but we had to say goodbye to them, unfortunately. Okay, hang on, I don't know how to start. Okay. Okay, and this is the process of retouching. So you can see very clearly in this left image, they come in bundles, and it's super cheap, and you would buy that from a villager, and you would kind of take that out and start to lay it down one by one. And we started from the left to the right, and they would be able to still open the market while the retouching is being done. And on the right side, you see how the condition of the leaf, which decayed into this kind of almost dirt-like conditions. This next project is called Clover. Again, another pavilion, and we have many of them. Although we don't advertise to be pavilion designers, it just happened. Just because during COVID, I think nothing much was happening. This pavilion was designed as a part of an annual design event in Bangkok. The structure is a temporary structure designed to be there for only 1 week. In this image, you can capture the essence of Bangkok, right? Everything is happening at the same time. You have extremely beautiful, ornate temples, very religious, very traditional. We have some shop houses from the 50s with Chinese families living and selling noodles for many decades. And you have these skyscrapers beyond that, very shiny, very glass high-rise buildings. We have projects from OMA, from SOM. Everything is happening at the same time, right? But for us, it was about creating the simple structure from what we can find again in the site. And we thought about kind of exploring an architecture which sort of, again, grew wildly from this chaotic context. And we also thought about how we can make the most minimum space, which in our context is just a shade, a shadow that can become a space. Some model photos, as you can see, that it's just a cluster of these trampoline-like structures. You can see later how they're made, and then they have no clear entrance. So as you can see here, each column is of a different height, and they are tied together with a pipe beam. Inside those sandbags are 30, 40, and 60 kilos of sand, depending on how high the columns are. And inside the sand is this kind of a steel kind of customized plate, sort of like an umbrella stand, which weighs everything down. We did have a structural engineer for this project, but he said, yeah, let's just do it, and then we can monitor it during the event. So during the event, I actually had to go and water the sandbags because I was afraid it was going to fly away. So putting water in them actually helped them weigh down more. So you can see the details here. The fabric is a very typical sun shading fabric we use for carving. And so it's a kind of very thin strings of plastic which have been tied together and water can come. And we stitch them together into this huge kind of circular shape and tie them. And actually everyone here was like interns or staff. They were also assembling the structure there on site with us. And once inside the space, this kind of the craziness or chaotic scenes of Bangkok is cropped underneath this very wide abstract space, which is actually made from things that we found around ourselves. And we also worked with a lighting designer who designed these kind of little lamps that are solar powered on top of the columns. And then when you would walk around the columns, they would flicker on and off depending on who accesses the spaces. So, I mean, essentially this structure is like a structure that reflects the movement of people, sun, and wind. With the structure and with the fabric this next project, House C, is again situated in Chiang Mai, a residential area beside the river surrounded by trees. The client was a father and son, wanted a house where they could live together close to nature. You can see that beyond this building or this house, you will see that there is a kind of very beautiful river that extends across the entire street. The plan, as always, is very simple. We deliberately start off our planning very, very simple, almost generic. And then we try to break down the rules of what we can do within these plans. The house is divided into 3 main parts. On the left is like a guest room. In the center is a big gathering space with kind of an earthen floor you'll see later. And on the right is the master area. As we were planning, we couldn't fit everything inside the plan, so we would just like extend bay windows and things out. We don't see our rules as something that's restrictive, but our rules as something for us to break, and perhaps breaking our own rules is inviting other people to break them as well. The structure, once it's finished, looks almost like a huge table for something we're doing now in the workshop, but it's very, very simple. To be honest, when we visited the site, we felt that this site is so beautiful. We don't want to build anything here, and it doesn't need such a luxurious or amazing house. It just needs somewhere you can sleep and just look outside. So that was kind of the starting point of this table structure. This is during the construction. It was Taka lived on site for 2 months just because we wanted to control things, and it's not a bad site to be in. We get to have lunch by the river and see nature, and then you can see this is during the construction of the inner dirt floor, which does not have structure underneath, right? So which means essentially you can pour water down and cool air can rise from the ground, and the river brings this cool air into the surrounding spaces around this courtyard. And again, a very nice image from the construction site. When closed, this house doesn't look like a house. It looks like perhaps a very anonymous box. But when open, the street and the river connects as one space through this earthen floor. An image of the central courtyard. So you enter through the house, sort of like in a garage gate, and you have this central space, which is made of earthen floor. This technique in Japanese is called the doma or tataki technique, which was used hundreds of years ago before concrete was invented. Our first time doing this, we just opened YouTube with our contractor and we watched YouTube together, translated, and we made samples and we made it on site. So again, we have to adopt and adapt different ways and try to make it within different our context. The table you see there is our collaboration with a furniture designer, also another client, who proposed that we could use some old wood from another project to make this nice table in the central space. A view from the master bedroom. When you wake up, you can see this river from your bedroom. And wherever you are in this table structure, you can see to the opposite side of the house. You can see that it's very, very transparent. When all the sliding doors are open, the house functions almost as one room. We use aluminum windows on the outside and timber windows towards the inner courtyard. This is because timber sometimes in our climate is very difficult to maintain. And the client raised some concerns, so we wanted to sort of introduce still this timber materials, but more towards the inside. The furniture we also designed, and it's also circulated around this grid. Furniture is sometimes also to us a little bit ambiguous, and it suggests that perhaps maybe you can have a dining room here, or maybe not, or maybe you want to work closer to the kitchen, but it suggests a certain potential function. These mirrors are two-sided. We just decided last minute, but because the surrounding was so beautiful, we didn't want to have this front and back side, which often occurs when the building is facing a scenery so beautiful. We didn't want to forget that the other side, which is also beautiful. So we did this double-sided mirror, which you walk around the house and you can see the reflection of your garden inside of the mirror as well. A view from the kitchen out into the river. And to us, we are not shy about showing systems and technicalities and the essence of things we need to live. In Thailand, we still need to store water, so these are water tanks, and you have solar panels that help to save energy during the day, and the water that we gather is from public water, and then everything, all of these, I would say like devices for energy saving or for living is attached really kind of unbashedly onto the structure like parasite. So once you go up to the roof, you have this, again, another beautiful view of the river and this sun shading fabric, which helps cool down the slab. On the floor, we use this concrete blocks, which have legs on them. Again, they're ready-made, and they create this air gap or shadow in between where you're standing and the concrete floor so that it doesn't directly heat up the floor. And again, of course, we love to go back to the houses. Hopefully, we are still on good terms with the client, and then we take photos and see how they live and spy on them a little. And this is kind of the image of the house after, I would say, 6 months of living. And this space has become some kind of hobby space for gardening and storage and all of those tools and things. This little project is a house in Tokyo, Japan. We developed a design for a Japanese developer as a model home, which would be able to adapt to various sites and clients' needs. Because there wasn't a specific client or site, it was important for us to design something that could be kind of fit into any typical plot in Tokyo. And after sort of we worked with the developer to create this kind of schematic design, and they would put it up on this website. And if somebody would be interested, they would pair it with a piece of land, and then the client would come to us to develop the design further. So it's kind of an interesting model that the developer is trying to create. So this is their website. I found it interesting. So they were hiring different young architects to propose these little houses, and so they would do also price calculations and space, and so people could click on them and see the floor plans, and also the possible plots of land they could buy. So again, with all of our projects, we wanted to explore the idea of the house, which is not something that's inherently complete within itself, rather a structure in which relationships can continue to evolve over time. So these relationships refer to various elements such as inside, outside, the city, the home, family structure, and lifestyle. So we began by thinking about the form of the house and thinking about the cheapest system we could build with in Japan, which is a timber system in almost like a 2x2 grid or so. So we wanted to use this grid, but somehow free it from this restraining sort of feeling of the grid. So we created an outline of steps that would create an inlet for light and air and views towards the outside, and also different terraces. So by entrusting the functions of the house onto the exterior walls, we are creating this open plan, which is again supported by wooden frames, the most efficient and typical affordable frame in Japan. And images of the large atrium, which would allow for the occupants to add floors in the future. The bedroom there. And then the contour again that we wanted to sort of put kind of our ideas onto the freedom through the contour is shapes the boundary between inside and outside. And so the house marks the new beginnings and allows for people to adapt and adopt to these contours the way they like. This is our last project. It's a very special project because we designed this with our students. Every year in the school that we are teaching, we have these summer projects called Design and Construction for Community. So instructors get this project and they can propose different little projects throughout the countryside where they would work with around 10 students to design, construct if possible, or maybe monitor the site inspection. So we began this project as this kind of proposal to build a multi-purpose space, which is requested by a rural school in the northeastern part of Thailand. The main idea, again, is how to build the most cheapest minimal form of gathering space within our context that would be versatile enough for the school to host different activities and would still be able to use for perhaps parent gatherings or storage of sports equipment people. And we began by bringing the students to the site, measuring the site, drawing site plans, interviewing the users. We worked for, I think, around 2 months, 1 to 2 months to conclude the design. We made different models in our office, making paper models, also plans, and we did brainstorming, so kind of like a one long workshop. Then we came up with this very simple structure using only a few pipes, which is bended by hand, and some kind of simple materials to steel, which could also everything be welded on site. So you have at the bottom a room, which could be used as a classroom, as storage, a ceiling which is suspended from these kind of gate-like frames, and a kind of purlins which are bent into only one direction and then set on top of this one-way leaning structure. The plan is also very simple. This shape also came from the students, and we selected this one out of many of them for, I don't know, randomly. But and then this again, the structure is detached from that room, and it creates the kind of, the corners are braced, and you have entries from all four sides. Images of the construction. It went very fast. Of course, it was very easy to construct, welding at certain points and joints. And you see here that although the building is curved, it's only doing one curve with a very thin pipe, steel pipe, which is done on site. This is the image of completion. You can see that on the right there is the existing school building, so it's somehow the scale is sort of referencing the buildings around it, and it's sort of also, I forgot to mention that there's this playground in the back of this building for the kindergarten students. So whatever we made here, we didn't want to block that. So we wanted to make something transparent that would allow for still the playground to be visible from all sides of the site. As you enter from the school grounds, you can see that the roof is doing this kind of very low curve, and it sort of slowly reveals itself once you move your car or walk towards the school. And again, the transparency towards the backside or the playground. And in the interior, we used a kind of just polycarbonate and to reflect the sunlight off the silver roof down into the rooms, which meant that no electricity needed to be used during the day. And it creates this kind of transparency and appreciation for the surroundings, even more so than being outside. And again, at certain points, the roof comes down very low to create this kind of semi-outdoor rooms within this large roof. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I find the idea of layers of temporality in your buildings incredibly interesting. And I was wondering if you saw a distinction in the way that you thought about the idea of memory and the skeleton versus that which was infill. Like if the skeleton was this thing that was universal and perhaps not tied to program, and maybe this precious thing that was readapted, and perhaps the infill was this kind of generic but programmatic necessity, or if there was a distinction between those two different.
Yeah, I mean, for us, definitely we come up with the structure first. So structure is very important to us. And then the infill is something more, something to give, to follow the client's requirements. So it means for us, if the structure and the infill is somehow separate, we can always shift the design. The design can always be free, and we can kind of allow for different requirements to happen within that structure. So definitely the infill is secondary, and it's something that we feel would give the people who want to live there what they actually want and need. Right? So yeah, I mean, the memory for us is more perhaps in the structure, but I think we don't perhaps think much about memory, but more about giving each element their own presence within the building, which means they are allowed to be elsewhere, or they are allowed to be gone, and they are allowed to move around depending on what happens, perhaps even during design meetings or after.
Thanks for the presentation. First, I just had a quick question, because I think it's one of the only thing that I really thought was very different.
Yeah.
Everything else, it was very relatable. But on the house by the river,
yeah,
the fact that the fence,
yeah,
like you almost cannot see? Did
Yeah.
you convince the client? Or, because it feels like a very architectural decision that like you convince the client to, and then they're like, yeah.
You mean security, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the times in Thailand, you have this huge plots of land that are bought by one person, like a developer, and they split the plot into like little plots. So sometimes these plots of land are within the secured compound. So there, it's not on the main road, right? So you have another level of security outside of your land. But that is a very like architectural proposal. They were really kind of, I don't know, it feels kind of like kind of naked somehow. But in the end, we proposed to build like a shrub. So a lot of plants are on that fence now, and it blocks the view a lot. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation, Isabel. And I really loved the way you started it. Like, I want to talk about differences, about similarities, and really gentle. And I will read this one. When did you understand that the simplicity that you bring to a project is a gift, or you always knew?
We didn't always know. What we do, I think, is not. I don't think it's not a style or a preference, but it's more out of necessity. And I think more and more people cannot build what they want with the budget that they have, right? And we don't want to turn down clients just because they don't have enough money or they are just not rich or whatever. But we propose half or something of what they want, like a starting point of what they want, let's say. And then we propose to them that when you want to build a house, and a house is not a product you don't build and you say, yeah, it's finished and you're happy, it doesn't work. House is very burdensome, you have to fix things and it grows. You have to think about where you put what, and it's just a very long process. So we, from the beginning, 80% of our clients cannot afford their requirements. From the beginning, we sit down with them and we essentialize like their list. You cannot do this, let's do this, is we have numbers for them. And we propose that this is the way you have to, this is the only way. You have to spend money on the important things, which is the structure and flexibility and your future and having open plots of land and a proper M&E system, everything. And then when you have money, you can add here and there. We propose different possibilities for them to attach or add in the future. So I think the realization of simplicity came from being within restriction, both in Japan and also in Thailand now. Although it's much cheaper than here, less and less people are able to afford to build yourself.
You add such an elegance, simplicity.
Yeah, thank you very much.